The Love Potion by Herman Charles Bosman, read for Melody. You mentioned the juba plant, Wimskalkloren said. Oh yes, everybody in the Mariko knows about the juba plant. It grows high up on the kranzes, and they say you must pick off one of its little red berries at midnight under the full moon. Then, if you are a young man and you are anxious for a girl to fall in love with you, all you have to do is squeeze the juice of the juba berry into her coffee. They say that after the girl has drunk the juba juice, she begins to forget all sorts of things. She forgets that your forehead is rather low, and that your ears stick out, and that your mouth is too big. She even forgets having told you the week before last that she wouldn't marry you if you were the last man in the Transvaal. All she knows is that the man she gazes at over her empty coffee cup has grown remarkably handsome. You see from this that the plant must be very potent in its effects. I mean, if you consider what some of the men in the Mariko look like. One young man I knew, however, was not very enthusiastic about juba juice. In fact, he always said that before he climbed up the krantz one night to pick one of those red berries, he was more popular with the girls than he was afterwards. This young man said that his decline in favour with the girls of the neighbourhood might perhaps be due to the fact that shortly after he had picked the juba berry he lost more of his front teeth. This happened when the girl's father, who was an irascible sort of fellow, caught the young man in the act of squeezing juba juice into his daughter's cup. And afterwards, while others talked of the magic properties of this love potion, the young man would listen in silence, and his lip would curl in a sneer over the place where his front teeth used to be. Yes, Karels, he would lisp at the end. I suppose I must have picked that juba berry at the wrong time. Perhaps the moon wasn't full enough or something. Or perhaps it wasn't just exactly midnight. I'm only glad now that I didn't pick off 2 of those red berries while I was about it. We all felt it was a sad thing that the juba plant had done that to the young man. But with Gideon van Merwe, it was different. One night I was out shooting in the veld with a lamp fastened on my hat. You know that kind of shooting. In the glare of the lamplight you can see only the eyes of the thing that you are aiming at, and you get 3 months if you are caught. They made it illegal to hunt by lamplight since the time a policeman got shot in the foot this way when he was out tracking cattle smugglers in the Bechuanaland border. The magistrate at Zeerust, who did not know the ways of cattle smugglers, found that the shooting was an accident. This verdict satisfied everybody except the policeman, whose foot was still bandaged when he came into court. But the men in the Volksraad, some of whom had been cattle smugglers themselves, knew better than the magistrate did as to how the policeman came to have a couple of buckshot in the soft part of his foot. Accordingly, they brought in this new law. Therefore, I walked very quietly that night in the krantz. Frequently I put out my hand and stood very still amongst the trees and waited long moments to make sure I was not being followed. Ordinarily there would be very little to fear, but a couple of days before 2 policemen had been seen disappearing into the bush. By their looks they seemed young policemen who were anxious for promotion and who didn't know that it is more becoming for a policeman to drink an honest farmer's peach brandy than to arrest him for hunting by lamplight. I was walking along, turning the light from side to side, when suddenly about 100 paces from me, in the full brightness of the lamp, I saw a pair of eyes. When I also saw, above the eyes, a policeman's khaki helmet, I remembered that a moonlit night such as that was not good for finding buck. So I went home. I took the shortest way too, which was over the side of the krantz, the steep side, and on my way down I clutched at a variety of branches, tree roots, stone ledges, and tufts of grass. Later on, at the foot of the krantz, when I came to and was able to sit up, there was that policeman bending over me. "Won't skulk," he said. I was wondering if you would lend me your lamp. I looked up. It was Gideon van der Merwe, a young policeman who had been stationed for some time at Duidepoort. I had met him on several occasions and found him very likeable. You can have my lamp, I answered, but you must be careful. It's worse for a policeman to get caught breaking the law than for an ordinary man. Gideon van der Merwe shook his head. No, I don't want to go shooting with the lamp, he said. I want to... And then he paused. He laughed nervously. It seems silly to say it, Oomskalk, he said, but perhaps you'll understand. I've come to look for a juba plant. I need it for my studies, for my third-class sergeant's examination, and it soon will be midnight, and I can't find one of those plants anywhere. I felt sorry for Gideon. It struck me that he would never make a good policeman. If he couldn't find a juba plant, of which there were thousands on the krantz, it would be much harder for him to find the spoor of a cattle smuggler. So I handed him my lamp and explained where he had to go and look. Gideon thanked me and walked off. About half an hour later he was back. He took a red berry out of his tunic pocket and showed it to me. For fear he should tell any more lies about needing that juba berry for his studies, I spoke first. Letty Cordier? I asked. Gideon nodded. He was very shy, though, and he wouldn't talk much at the start. But I had guessed long ago that Gideon van der Merwe was not calling at Christian Cordier's house so often just to hear Christian relate the story of his life. Nevertheless, I mentioned Christian Cordier's life story. Yes, Gideon replied. Letty's father has got up to what he was like at the age of 7. It's taken him a month so far. He must be glad to get you to listen, I said. The only other man who listened for any length of time was an insurance agent, but he left after a fortnight. By that time, Christian had reached to only a little beyond his 5th birthday. But Letty is wonderful, Oomskalk, Gideon went on. I've never spoken more than a dozen words to her, and of course it is ridiculous to expect her even to look at a policeman. But to sit there in the voorkamer with her father talking about all the things he could do before he was 6, and Letty coming in now and again with more coffee, that is love, Oomskalk. I agreed with him that it must be. I've worked it out, Gideon explained, that at the rate he's going now, Letty's father will have come to the end of his life story in 2 years' time, and after that I won't have any excuse for going there. It worries me. I said that no doubt it was disconcerting. I've tried often to tell Letty how much I think of her, Gideon said, but every time, as soon as I start, I get a foolish feeling. My uniform begins to look shabby, my boots seem to curl up at the toes, and my voice gets shaky. And all I can say to her is that I will come round again soon, as I have simply got to hear the rest of her father's story. Then what is your idea with the juba juice? I asked. The juba juice, Gideon van der Merwe said wistfully, might make her say something first. We parted shortly afterwards. I took up my lamp and gun, and as I saw Gideon's figure disappear among the trees, I thought of what a good fellow he was. And very simple. Still, he was best off as a policeman, I reflected, for if he was a cattle smuggler, it seemed to me that he would get arrested every time he tried to cross the border. Next morning, I rode over to Christian Cordier's farm to remind him about a tin of sheep dip that he still owed me from the last dipping season. As I stayed for only an hour, I wasn't able to get in a word about the sheep dip, but Christian managed to tell me quite a lot of the things that he did at the age of 9. When Letty came in with the coffee, I made a casual remark to her father about Gideon van der Merwe. Oh yes, he's an interesting young man, Christian Cordier said, and very intelligent. It's a pleasure for me to relate to him the story of my life. He says the incidents I described to him are not only thrilling, but very helpful. I can understand that. I wouldn't be surprised if he's made a sergeant one of these days. For those reasons, I always dwell on the more helpful parts of my story. I didn't take much notice of Christian's remarks, however. Instead, I looked quite carefully at Letty when I mentioned Gideon's name. She didn't give much away, but I'm quick at the colour that crept into her cheeks, the light that came into her eyes. On my way back, I encountered Letty. She was standing under a thorn tree. With her brown arms and her sweet quiet face and her full bosom, she was a very pretty picture. There was no doubt that Letty Cordy would make a fine wife for any man. It wasn't hard to understand Gideon's feelings about her. Letty, I said, do you love him? I love him, Oomskalk, she answered. It was as simple as all that. Letty guessed I meant Gideon van der Merwe without having spoken his name. Accordingly, it was easy for me to acquaint Letty with what had happened the night before, on the krantz, in the moonlight. At least, I only told her the parts that mattered to her, such as the way I explained to Gideon where the juba plant grew. Another man might have wearied her with a long and unnecessary description of the way he fell down the krantz, clutching at branches and tree roots, but I am different. I told her that it was Gideon who fell down the krantz. After all, it was Letty and Gideon's love affair, and I didn't want to bring myself into it too much. Now you'll know what to do, Letty, I said. Put your coffee on the table within easy reach of Gideon. Then give him what you think is long enough to squeeze the juba juice into your cup. Perhaps it will be even better, Letty said, if I watch through a crack in the door. I patted her head approvingly. After that, you come into the voorkamer and drink your coffee, I said. Yes, Oomskalk, she answered simply. And when you have drunk the coffee, I concluded, you'll know what to do next. Only don't go too far. It was pleasant to see the warm blood mount to her face. As I rode off, I said to myself that Gideon van der Merwe was a lucky fellow. There wasn't much more to tell about Letty and Gideon. When I saw Gideon sometimes afterwards, he was very elated, as I had expected he would be. So the juba plant worked, I inquired. It was wonderful, Oomskalk, Gideon answered, and the funny part of it was that Letty's father wasn't there either. When I put that juba juice into her coffee, Letty had brought him a message just before then that he was wanted in the Millilands. And was the juba juice all they claimed for it? I asked. You'd be surprised how quickly it acted, he said. Letty just took one sip at the coffee and then jumped straight into my lap. But then Gideon van der Merwe winked in a way that made me believe that he was not so very simple after all. It was pretty certain that the juba juice would work, Oomskalk, he said, after Letty's father told me that you had been there that morning.